So, we were talking about the F word earlier, facilitation, of course. We're going to walk you through the 7 steps of facilitation. We have our words up here, and we'll give you packets. Hopefully you have them. If you don't have a packet, we'll be handing them out if you don't. Cool. So while we're handing out the packets, you can just follow along by listening. Me and Aaron are going to talk you through it, and then we're actually going to have a facilitation that will show you how to do each of these steps as you're facilitating to the group. So our first one up here is what? Anybody want to take a stab at what they think that means? The what? Any guesses? Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about?
Yes. Very clearly, what are you talking about? So I have written down to introduce the activity. What is the title? What type of activity is it? So this morning, when we were doing our fun activity with Pat and Joni and Andrew, the very first thing we did was an icebreaker. And they said, we're going to do an icebreaker called Connecting Stories. That's the very first thing that you need to do when you're talking to a group, just to make sure everybody's on the same page of, all right, what are we doing? What's it called? Why? And actually, why is the second question. You're talking about what? The second natural question is going to be, why are we doing this? So state the purpose of the activity. What will participants learn? And if it's part of a larger activity, how does this activity help the group meet its objectives for that meeting? So with icebreakers, it's really just to break the ice. Not much of an introduction is needed in terms of why there, but when we get into the actual facilitation, you'll talk about the purpose of this is to learn about communication skills. The purpose of this is to address conflict management or something along those lines. All right. So how is the give instructions portion of it? If you have something that's going to require a lot of instructions, this is going to take up the majority of your time, just making sure that you're answering all those basic, like, what am I doing? How am I doing it? What do we need to set it up? Getting everybody in the right place where they need to be, and explaining how the activity is going to actually go through.
Okay. From there, questions. So when introducing activities like this, there will most likely be questions. So rather than the awkward addressing of that issue and being like, okay, does anybody have any questions? Was I clear? A good way to do that is just say, what questions do you have? That allows the group to not feel uncomfortable if they do have questions. So then there might be a few clarifying questions that the facilitators didn't quite address correctly, or if there's really confusion amongst the group, that's a chance to really just clear the air. And then you have to wait to see if hands are raised. And so what you can do is say all right, what questions do we have? And that'll kind of indicate to the group that if they have a question, they can raise their hand and we can address that question. And then if it's awkward silence, let it sit for a minute. Sometimes there's a difference between the speed at which people process and are willing to raise their hand to ask a question. And so a little awkward silence is not bad. And so from there, you're going to look for participants to nod and kind of be in agreement that we're ready to move on. So kind of consensus building amongst the group that there aren't questions, everyone feels good about moving on with the activity. From there, you're beginning the activity. So you're giving a signal if it's 3, 2, 1, or okay, go ahead, you're off in your groups, let's begin. And then, so then you're providing kind of that form to just get going. So that's where the actual activity begins. From there, you're watching. So this is where you'll facilitate and observe. So if you notice when we were just off in our groups, the 3 of us caught up a little bit, but then mostly we were listening into how you were talking to each other. Were you writing notes? Who was the leader from the group? Who was normally the first to brainstorm a song? Who was coming in to support? So we're trying to keep tabs on all of that, and if you can do it with people's names in mind, then once you get to that reflection piece, you can say okay, I noticed that you were really stepping out as a leader within your group and writing notes. How did you feel in that position? And then it draws in actual experience that everyone can kind of take note of into that reflection later on. So that watching process is really important. Don't just begin the procedure and then procedure. I don't know why I said it like that. Don't begin the activity and then just walk away. So then process. So this will get into discussing and summarizing the activity. It'll refer back to that watch step, and you'll be closing the discussion or statements. We're going to really get into this with the art of reflection that we talked about, and Leslie can elaborate on that.
Yeah. So kind of go more into some of the processing tools you can use. So this is called the Art of Reflection, and I actually have a handout that I'll give you after we're all done so that you can take these home with you. I know I like having things I can look back on. But just up on the screen are some like really easy and good ways to think about processing. So the first thing is only ask one question at a time. If you think back to when Joni and Pat and Andrew were facilitating earlier, they only ever asked one question as we were all talking in a big group. That way it really like allowed time for discussion and people to process. Especially when people aren't as quick with processors, it gives them time to think, especially if they're like internal processors. It's important that they have time to formulate what they want to respond with. The second thing is ask open-ended questions. So you don't want to like give a question that's yes or no. You really want to formulate discussion and allow people to have the time to bounce ideas back and forth off of each other. It's a really awesome way to start a conversation is to start with an easier question and move into more challenging questions so that people feel more comfortable by the time they're answering those challenging questions. That way it gives them space to be prepared and like open up to the group and be, again, it could be a brave space. So the next thing is to always practice active listening. Does anyone have a definition they want to share about active listening? Kylie?
When I think of active listening, I think of it as listening to understand rather than to respond.
Wow.
Also using affirmative nonverbals, so like looking at the person, nodding, or like showing with your body language that you're engaging in what they're saying.
Right. Are there any other thoughts or ideas on active listening? No, everything you guys said was exactly right. I know that when I listen, I definitely try to make sure I'm making eye contact, making sure that I'm just present in the conversation. And then the next thing is to get the group to think together. So it's really important that the whole group has the opportunity to like think through things. And like I said, not everyone processes in the same way. So what I'm actually going to have you do is pair up with somebody next to you. There's an odd number of you, so there will be a group of 3. And if you guys could think through, I'll give you 30 seconds to think on your own, and then we're going to pair up. What are some really good questions that you think are open-ended? So they don't have to be specifically related to any of the activities we've played today, but like some open-ended questions if you were to ask a group. I guess, think about an icebreaker or an activity that you may plan. What would you want to ask somebody to reflect on? So 30 seconds by yourselves, and then pair up with somebody next to you. I'll tell you when to think next. Okay, if you guys want to go ahead and pair up with somebody next to you and think through some questions that you could possibly ask a group.